Well, one of the things we have always really wanted to do is inspire people to become involved in some form of creation research or related activities, but not just to warm seats, but to do things, you know? And we have a doer tonight. Brian Forbes has been with us for, we were trying to count up, 2, 3, maybe 4 years now. And so he got ambitious and started looking into some things and got even more ambitious and more curious, and he wrote a book. And so he's just published his book, and tonight he's going to tell us about his book, From Noah to Hercules. Anything else you would like people to know about you, Brian?
No.
Anything you would like people to know about your husband?
It's in the speech.
Okay. Well, anything else he wants you to know about himself, he can tell you. Let's welcome Brian Forbes.
Brian?
All right. By the standard of some, I'm an expert. And by the standard of others, I'm not. But against the perfect standard, nobody is an expert. Jeremiah says, compared to him, all people are foolish and have no knowledge at all. When compared to the age of the earth, our lives are very short. Even old men have huge gaps in historical knowledge. So we can't know history unless one of three is true. We were either there, or we figured it out by using forensics, or we heard someone's testimony because they were there. There's a logical fallacy called an appeal to authority. It makes some sense that people of all stripes go to an expert for testimony. Experts often know things that we do not. But the fallacy applies when we assume that whenever you and an expert disagree, you are wrong. The most common objection to my evidence is an appeal to authority, because they say, you're not an expert. You can't tell me anything about this subject. So let's review these three options here. Okay, we got 3 ways to know truth about history. You can either be an eyewitness, which, as you look back in history, we don't have any of those left. Everybody that was there at the beginning is now gone. And you can see the basket here is empty. We can use forensics, which is basically an appeal to science. Looking at the rocks, looking at the biology, see if we can figure it out from there. Or we can hear testimony, which is an appeal to history. Number 1, personal experience doesn't apply because nobody was there. Science requires certain assumptions, and not all the pieces are there. But of the 3 options that we have here, historical testimony is the most often neglected. So I opened the Creation Evolution Controversy Wikipedia page, and it actually says, the dispute involves the field of evolutionary biology, but also the field of geology, paleontology, thermodynamics, nuclear physics, and cosmology. And as you can see, history is not even listed. I may not have been witness to the events that we're talking about, but I can quote the people who were there and the accounts that they left for us to read. And I think that's a valid appeal to authority. I'm not an expert in history, and you probably aren't either, but that's okay, because nobody is more expert than an eyewitness. The experts are drawing from the same sources as I do in my book and in these slides. And you can make up your own mind about the evidence, just as I have done. And the experts need to argue the facts. Once you know the facts, they have to argue the facts. You can't demand trust, because that won't count. All right, about me. See, this is why I didn't tell you anything else. I don't know very much about this stuff any more than then you come by with a few years of study. I did look into this for quite an aggressive several years, but I'm like a young Christian evangelist. What I know well, and I believe to the full. And I think if you look into the evidence that I've looked into, you would be a very aggressive evangelist yourself, if you're anything like me at least. I don't know as much as the experts, but what I do know, I know with certainty. All right, and talk about this meeting. I'm a huge fan of this meeting. I come at any time I get a chance, and I stay longer than I should sometimes. My kids are all in bed by the time I get home. Thank you, Christine. You can download past speeches at darwinisdead.com, and hopefully they start putting those back on there because I think they're fantastic. I highly recommend the speeches given by Dennis Swift and Willie Dye. Dennis Swift talked about the Ica stones and the Nazca lines, and Willie Dye talked about the dinosaur and human footprints in Glen Rose, Texas. And they present very compelling evidence for outrageous claims, and I intend to carry on that tradition. All right, so this is how I came to know about this meeting, and I think this has relevance for everybody here probably. I've been studying creation science for a couple of years, and I was regularly looking into different sources like videos and books and things. And one morning I was driving into my church parking lot and I saw a guy in one of the videos that I'd seen. I was a bit starstruck, and I introduced myself to the guy, and then we just went on our merry way. We went into the sanctuary and did some worship, and later on he'd been praying and worshiping and talking to God, and God obviously had something for me to do because the guy was told to give me a DVD series about dinosaurs and the Bible, and so we went and had lunch and we discussed various topics, and so it led me to look into this meeting to see exactly what was going on over here. It lit a fire in me that's still burning, and my passion might have gotten a little bit less aggressive or excited if I hadn't had this community to build me up, because they don't have this where I live, about 20 minutes away, that I could find. So in trying to find this group, I was searching the web, and I found that there just aren't very many of them here in Orange County. Very few people talking about young earth creationism. It's actually quite shocking how little interest there is in the topic of origins, because I actually started a group at my house to invite my friends and talk about the stuff that I've been discovering, and I could introduce 200 people to the topic and get maybe 2 people to come to my house to talk about it, and that's actually kind of sad because this is kind of an important topic. We have the answers here to how and why we are here, and it's not just look at the Bible. There's actual forensic science. There's historical science, testimony. And the secular world is wrong. And I really think that we need to get ourselves out there to advertise, get some more people involved. All right, this is my website, from Noah to Hercules.com. This talk will be slightly different than my book. My book is a lot of quotes and a little bit of science, and this talk is basically 2 or 3 different issues total. You can't really get deep into it for one speech. Mythology does, this is my thesis, mythology supports the biblical record and a young earth. Young means 6,000 years, or thereabouts. Okay, here's my outline. We got science, which I'll touch very briefly on, and we'll move into paganism, and then Jewish history as opposed to paganism, and then I'll give my conclusion. All right, we'll start with some obvious things in science, things that are very, very hard to refute if you're not a believer in a young earth. Flowing water is powerful. If you dump a bucket of water on the ground, you get trenches. Imagine dumping the ocean on the ground. you get more than a trench. It would actually be catastrophic. All right, so here's the seafloor, at least the two pictures on the right are the seafloor. And here are the layers, the way they're laid down. So you got perfectly flat layers, and it goes from one kind of rock to another kind of rock, from red to white to black to red to white. You know, it goes back and forth between different kinds of rocks. There's no gopher holes or stream beds or tree roots, as you'd expect over vast periods of time. It's all flat. I go back to the seafloor, and you look at the seafloor, and it's bumpy. And it has things on the bottom, like coral and things. The picture on the left, I took that at the Colorado River, where they have jet skis and boats going by, making big waves and making flat surfaces where the waves went in and went out. And it actually makes a perfectly flat surface. So you can get the flat surface on the where the flowing water is, but if you look deeper in the water, you see the bumps, just like on the seafloor. That's where the water didn't recede. There is no speed in the water going back and forth. So I think that is probably how you get the flat layers with the flowing water. And another thing that scientists tend to forget is that sometimes you don't require time, but power. Like dumping the bucket of water on the ground versus dumping the ocean on the ground. You get the major difference in the way things happen. So if I take my finger, put it on the podium, and press down as hard as I can, how many millions of years do you think I'd have to hold my finger there before it break the table? I don't think it'll break the table, and it'll break my finger. But besides that, it's a matter of pressure or force. It's not a matter of time. You've got to remember that when you're doing your science. All right, moving to biology. Lamarck was a guy that said that physical changes in a parent would be passed to the offspring. And he said that moles became blind from living underground, and giraffes, as they tried to get to the higher branches, stretched their necks and actually grew longer necks from stretching their necks. But Lamarckism was falsified in science. Some guy actually took a bunch of mice and cut off their tails. And every generation, the tail was still there. The next generation would have a tail, and then you'd cut it off. It would be awful to be that mouse, but you lose your tail, it doesn't end up in your offspring. And the environmental pressures do not change the offspring. So Lamarckism is falsified. You can't have environmental pressures creating different traits in organisms.